Welcome to our weekly Bible Reader Companion Series. This week our reading is taken from Acts chapters 10 through 19, with our memory verse being taken from Acts chapter 17 and verse 24. Our memory verse reads from the New King James, "God, who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands." Today we're going to consider the text found in Acts chapter 19, verses 21 through 28. As we noted yesterday, Acts chapter 19 has Paul in his final preaching journey, and here we see that he's beginning to make his preparations to start his return back to Jerusalem, since the gospel had been preached in Ephesus and established there. Let's pick up the reading together, chapter 19, verse number 21. "When these things were accomplished, Paul purposed in the Spirit, when he had passed through Macedonia and Achaia, to go to Jerusalem, saying, 'After I have been there, I must also see Rome.' So he sent into Macedonia two of those who ministered to him, Timothy and Erastus, but he himself stayed in Asia for a time. And about that time there arose a great commotion about the way. For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Diana, brought no small profit to the craftsmen. He called them together with the workers of similar occupation and said, 'Men, you know that we have our prosperity by this trade. Moreover, you see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but throughout almost all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying that there are not gods which are made with hands. So not only this, our trade of ours is in danger of falling into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess Diana may be despised and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship.' Now when they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, 'Great is Diana of the Ephesians.'" The narrative style of Acts has been compared to a lecture with lantern slides. The pictures are shown one after another, illustrating the story of the lecturer wants to tell, while he makes the transition from one plate to another by some general remarks. This comparison is especially apt in the account of Paul's ministry in Ephesus. Three pictures have already been shown: the incidents of the 12 disciples that were converted to Christ, to the discussions in the school of Tyrannus, and the encounter with the magicians. And now comes the fourth, which is the most vivid of all. The disturbance which might have led to very ugly consequences arose out of the threat which the gospel presented to all pagan worship, and especially to the cult of the great goddess Artemis, and to those industries which were largely dependent upon that cult. One of the takeaways we see here in this text is the great boldness and confidence of Paul in preaching the truth while knowing that it would bring about great potential for persecution. He continued to preach the purity of the gospel, convicting the hearts of men to believe in the one true God. He continued to preach, saying that they be no gods which are made with hands, as we noted in verse 26. Opposition and adversity must not silence the Christian or the preacher of God's word. Persecution never produced in Paul a hesitancy to preach or present a watered-down gospel. He reminded those in Thessalonica, as he writes to them, he says, "We were bold in our God to speak to you the gospel of God in much conflict," referring back to the things that they had suffered when they were in Philippi. Let us all preach and teach with that same boldness. Our God has not given us a spirit of fear, as Paul writes to Timothy as well. Paul had great conviction. Paul could be bold in the face of opposition because he was certain that his exhortation did not come from deceit or error. He was certain of what he believed and why he believed it. We must have this same conviction, driven by a faith that comes through God's word, just as Paul. Paul always tried to be at peace with all men. He was willing to forgo his rights for the sake of the gospel. He urged brethren to be tolerant and to seek peace with one another. Even so, it cannot always be that way. And like Paul, we must make it a priority to first please God. Preaching the truth on unpopular subjects likely will please a few men, but preaching the whole counsel of God will please the one we should desire to please, God himself. As Paul writes in Galatians, the first chapter, he says, "For if I still please men, I would not be a servant of Christ." Let's remember God, our Creator, and the one whom we serve as we live our lives on this earth. From our memory verse, Acts chapter 17 and verse number 24, God, who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands. Let's give God the glory and the honor that he deserves. Thank you again, and join us again next week as we continue to study and meditate on God's Word together.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook for more content like this.